Today I'm going to talk about elder. It's such a fantastic plant.
It's the herb of the year for 2013. It's been used for food, fun, and magic since the time of the Egyptians. Koidu Sulev, a trained pharmacist and a passionate gardener, talks about how to use elder in your home. Welcome to Richters Seminars. This video presentation is from a series of free educational seminars on herb and garden topics offered each year at Richters.
My name is Koidu Sulev. I have been working here for 14 years, and actually I have a very long background when it comes to herbal remedies. When it comes to elder, I was interested in elder when I was 8 years old. And what happened was that my uncle Arthur, he was a businessman in Sweden, but he very frequently went to England. So one Christmas he bought me this book, The Fairies of the Trees. And I especially like the elder fairy. So even though I didn't know English, I read it because I was able to read. So when he came for my dad's birthday in February, he translated it. But I had memorized it in English already, so I don't know what kind of pronunciation I had. But I just loved this elder fairy. And the following summer, as it happened, my father, who was a doctor, but my family had to flee the Russians after the war from Estonia. My mother was a pharmacist, so they got the credentials after a few years. So anyway, my father was a firm believer in fresh air. He talked about pollution even though people didn't know what it was, and the word pollution didn't even exist in those days. So we rented this old farmhouse from a Swedish farmer. In Sweden, being an older country than Canada, he rented a new house to us, which was built in the late 1800s. And he moved into the old house that was built in the 1600s. So, to my big amazement, when we moved out there, the house was situated maybe 150 feet from a small river. The river was maybe as wide as this room. And since I was so thrilled about the elderberry fairy, I recognized the blooms. So lo and behold, by the river there were elderberry bushes. So I was very happy about it. So my parents, they visited us. They worked during the week. They came out Saturday evening, and my mother was not the loving, kissing, baking, hugging mother. She was very much a professional person. So both my parents valued education most of all. But we had two aunts who looked after us at the farmhouse, and also in the city. They were relatives to my father. The whole family, father, mother, 3 girls, 2 aunts and 1 uncle, we went on country walks. In Sweden there is something called allemansrätt. It means that all the citizens in Sweden has access to all the land in Sweden. So even though if the farmer owns the fields and his own dwelling and the garden, everyone is allowed to walk along the hedgerows, and also you can go into the woods and the forest and gather berries and mushrooms. So there we were, this big group, refugees, walking along the hedgerows. So my mother was she liked to show off to the girls how smart she was. So she pointed out all the plants. Since she didn't know the Swedish names, she mentioned the Latin names. So we were like 8, 6, and 4. And there was Sambucus nigra and Tussilago farfara. So by the time I started high school and took botany, I knew all the Latin names, I knew what the plants were good for, I knew where they grow. So my father also, he didn't believe in modern medicine, you know, penicillin and all these other wonder drugs. So he had the ants boil and cook and make salves and tinctures in the farm kitchen. There was no running water, a wooden stove. We had all the dried herbs hanging from the ceiling, and there was always a pot cooking. So who did the gathering of the herbs? The 3 girls. Because the 2 aunts had never been married, they had never had any children, but they sure knew how young girls were supposed to be brought up. Laziness was not tolerated, so they always found things for us to do. We also had a big veggie patch, so we were pulling weeds, we were thinning the carrots, we were bringing water from the river to the cucumbers. So the aunt said, okay girls, here is the basket, pick all the elderberry blooms, because this was, you know, in June. Don't come back until the basket is full, and don't stay too long because you have the carrots to thin out. I'm holding a jar with elderberry jam, and this is from an old cookbook. Elderberry jam was quite a favorite in the past, especially when children had winter colds, because elderberry is known as a remedy for colds. So in this recipe I used 100 grams of the dried elderberry with 100 milliliters of water, and I let the berries soak overnight. The next morning I peeled an apple and cut into small pieces. So I put the apple into the soaked berries in the water, and I also added 200 grams of sugar. You can use honey, of course, or stevia if you so wish. So I let it boil until the apples were soft and the jam looked mushy. So I took it off the heat, let it cool a bit, and I crushed the berries with one of these potato mashers. So after that, it's time to put it back on the stove and let it start to boil up, and add liquid surto, which is pectin. And the jam is really wonderful. It has a very nice consistency, and especially good it's on your morning toast. You can also put it in tea. This is a very European way of drinking tea. You put jam in your tea. It's a very easy recipe, and as I mentioned, that there's no need to go out in the wild trying to find the berries at the end of the summer. You can very easily use the dried one, and the result is as good. But you have to be careful with the raw berries, that the stems are toxic, so you have to make sure to take as many of the stems off as possible to avoid being, so to say, poisoned, which actually it's not as dangerous you might think, but in all the books you look, or all the information you get, they always say that only the berries are safe to eat, not the leaves or the stems. So now, since Conrad covered many things that I was going to talk about, so I will just show you how to make a tincture. He mentioned a wide-mouthed jar. I like the bottles myself because in a big jar you are bound to make too much tincture, and very unlikely that you are going to provide a whole neighborhood with tinctures. So I would say in a bottle like this. So what I'm trying to show, maybe 2 bottles like this is good, and he said that they last for 10 years. And all you need is maybe 5 or 6 drops. That's all you need. Conrad also mentioned that the various solvents you could use. This, I personally like to use vodka. Some people object to the alcohol level, but if you use 2 drops in a cup of hot tea, what happens to the alcohol? It evaporates, so there is no alcohol left. And Conrad said that put in a cover so the dried material is completely covered. Why so? Because if you don't, the mold will set in. And he said also to shake every day. So that's why I prefer the bottles to a jar. Easier to shake. If you shake this, it's more of an effort. So I have these. Now, elderberries, Conrad also mentioned that the berries and the blooms have different properties. And that's very true. I don't know whether you remember that both of them are very good for colds and flu. The berries, he also mentioned, were especially good for viral infections. And what happens is that the elderberry puts a coat around the cells that the virus tries to penetrate. So there is a coating, and the virus can't get through this coating. So that's what happens. Okay, berries. They are very hard, as you know, and so what do you do with berries? You usually crush them, or if you have a grinder of any kind. These electric coffee grinders, small ones, used to be very popular in the earlier days. So those are good. But a mortar and pestle, they are good enough. So since I don't have that much time, so I will just put the berries in. They are not that well crushed, which is fine too, because then you just let it sit maybe 8 weeks instead of 4. So sometimes people think that, how do you know when it's strong enough? What if it gets too strong? Not to worry, because what happens, that the solvent, in this case the alcohol, only absorbs so much. So think about a kitchen sponge. You spill some milk on the floor. You take the sponge, and if there is a lot of milk, you have to squeeze out the sponge and wipe once more. So the alcohol only absorbs a certain amount, and usually it's just the right amount. You can see that the elderberries, they turn this purplish color, while the berries, the liquid will be yellow. So Conrad also mentioned that tinctures, they last a long time, and what's also good is that you don't need that much of it. It's not that you have to drink, you know, a whole cups and cups of tea. So when, after, let's say, 6 weeks, you strain through a coffee filter and you put it into these little dropper bottles. So I have made most of my tinctures myself. It's very important to actually label and tell what it is and when you made it, because I have bottles like this with a liquid and it just says the date, but I forgot to say what it was. So you try to look, you know, could it be this? And I have also filtered it, so that makes it even harder. If you feel that you're really busy and you don't have time to mess around with your own medicines, if you go to IKEA, they sell the elderberry syrup. You just take this little in a glass and you fill it with water. Elder is called fleder. Another wonderful recipe using elderberry flowers is the Elderberry Cordial, and an extra bonus is that small children will very readily drink it when they have the January colds or throughout the winter months. It's very tasty and very easy to make. You boil up the flowers with the water and the sugar, as you can see in the recipe. You let it boil up and then you take it off the stove and you add the lemon slices. As you know, this will add vitamin C to the drink as well. You let it stand in room temperature for 48 hours. Then you drain it through a coffee filter. This is what I usually do, so you can get a clear liquid, and pour it into a bottle. I keep mine in a fridge, but any cool and dark place would be also sufficient to keep it not to get moldy. Another wonderful recipe using elderberries in this case, it would be the elderberry vinegar. And in this case you use the berries, not so much the flowers. All you need is 1 cup of distilled white vinegar, 1 cup of white wine, and then you use only 1 or 2 teaspoons of the crushed berries. If you use it as a salad dressing, add a clove of garlic, and you can also add any of your favorite dried herbs or fresh herbs. So you add everything and then you let it steep. And since in this case you leave all the material in the vinegar itself, so there is no need to strain it or keep it for so long, or so it's ready, I would say, in a day or 2. So it's something you can enjoy on your salads. And also remember that elderberry, whether it's in wine or cordial or any other drink, and in this case the vinegar, it has medicinal properties as well. Now, elderberry flower oil is very useful, especially when it comes to skin care. it's not meant so much for culinary purposes, but elderberry flowers, they have special qualities that will keep your skin youthful and beautiful, and also it reduces freckles and age spots. Very easy to make. All you need is almond oil, and I would recommend 100 milliliters. First you put the elderberry flowers in a small jar. You don't need more than maybe 2 tablespoons, and then you add the almond oil. Make sure that the oil covers the blooms completely, because in an oil sometimes the blooms get moldy. It's also very important to keep it in a cool place and dark place and shake it once in a while. So after, let's say, a week or so, the oil is ready to be strained, and use it in another clean bottle. Make sure that the bottle is clean, otherwise the mold will develop again. And then you can use it for your hands or your face, or if you have sore feet and dry feet, you can use them there as well. So as you can see, elder does not only have use for as a medicine or food or drink, but also for skin care. Coming from a northern country, there are a lot of traditions about elder. And elder actually comes from an Anglo-Saxon word. Eld means fire, and eld is still fire in Swedish. So it means the fire mother. And the earth mother. The earth mother, she protected all the elder bushes, and there were a lot of elder bushes in Scandinavia, because when people settled in the 16th and 17th century, where did they build their house? Next to a river or next to a lake, because that gave a better access to water. So these elderberries were all grown along the river in our case. So there are a lot of traditions. You have to not to upset the elder mother. So you had to, let's say that you wanted to cut a little branch for a whistle. My uncle Carl, he made me these whistles, elderberry whistles, and they had a very sharp sound. So the aunts were not allowing the girls to whistle in the house. We had to go outside and use our whistles. Each farm also had, like the Leprechauns in Ireland, the little people. They were 2 feet tall. They had red hats, wooden clogs, and grey suits. So you had to make sure that they were happy and protecting your farm. So these creatures, they were called tomtenisse, like young Father Christmas. So you had to put some porridge out for these creatures or people. So in the morning it was always gone, and I suspect that the barn cats didn't bother with mice hunting that night. So you had to appease all these nature creatures. There was also this beautiful, she was not a fairy, but an evil fairy. Her name was Hulda, and she was most beautiful. But she looked like a human, but she was all hollowed out at the back. And she usually made especially men to come and follow her into the woods. She was also interested in getting the children in the, like Hansel and Gretel, some kind of a witch. Okay, 23rd of June, which happens to be my birthday. It's the eve of the St. John's Day. And that was the magical night and day in Scandinavia. It's even more important than Christmas or Easter or everything combined, because that night was the magical night. That was when the fairies were dancing, when the ferns were in bloom with shiny star-like flowers. That was the night when the witches tried to get into your house, and the vampires. The vampires you had to ward off with elderberry berries on the windowsill and the threshold of the door, but you also had to put some thorns, so because vampires liked counting, and they got confused when they saw these thorns. So, and you know that they disappear at night, at daylight, but the that time of the year it never really gets dark in Sweden, so I don't know why they were so worried about the vampires that night. So that was that. And also when the young girls and boys got married, they had elderflowers in their hair. They also spread the berries to the four winds to bring luck. On that night, that was the night when you had to pick your magical elderberry flowers. The others you could pick any time of the day, but you know, you picked the one magical one, and that protected you throughout the whole year. So you took it with you to the city as well. And one year I remember I was very worried about this custodian of the farm, so I brought him elderberry bloom as well, and a broken whistle. So I hoped that he would protect us that way. So now you saw the tincture. I also wrote recipes. These are very much what the ants made. And when I started my pharmaceutical studies, my parents didn't give me a chance to choose what I wanted to study. There was only one choice, and that was pharmacy. In Sweden, you had to be an apprentice for 2 years, and that's when you learned to mix all these syrups and tinctures and pills and salves. So these were pretty much what I did when I was an apprentice. And I remember that the cold remedy, it had elderberries in it, also yarrow and peppermint. Peppermint was growing by the river, yarrow was on a slope behind the farmhouse. The nature there is pretty much like Muskoka, you know, bared granite and sand. So the yarrow grew there, so the girls knew where to go for yarrow. But I remember from my apprentice days, we used raspberry syrup to mix, you know, these three herbs with. And it was so good, so I usually mixed a little bit more and had a small paper cup for myself each time I had to mix it. So these are all very fond memories, and you can see that they are all very, very easy to make. If you don't find any fresh elderberry flowers, you can buy the dried ones here. Usually it's 1/3 of the dried one to 1, you know, measure of the fresh one. As you mentioned that, you know, your friend used stevia and honey, yeah, that you can easily substitute, you know, the sugar I have mentioned. And the elderberry tincture is, as Conrad mentioned, good for colds and flu, but it's also good for arthritis. And I told you about the virus penetration, and it's also very antioxidant. In the olden days, the antioxidants were called blood purifiers, which the modern doctors scorn. So you can see that the elderberry vinegar, you can use it as a medicine, but since it's the garlic and the peppercorns, you can use it for a salad dressing as well. I made the elderberry jam myself. You can see it over there. It's very easy to make. So if you follow the instructions, and it's really good on toast. It's, yes?
I just wondered, are the berries good at all for dyeing?
Yes, because you can see 5 minutes. So elderberry was also used for dye plants, you know, since they made their own clothing and they weave their own clothing. So I tried to tell you a little bit about the other things, but you know, some can't even talk. Somebody important as Harry Potter, he used the elderberry wand, and he was having the latest or the last battle with Lord Voldemort after his mentor had died or was killed. So Lord Voldemort, he stole the Dumbledore's elder wand, and this is how actually Harry Potter won this battle, even though he was actually, you know, meant to die at that moment. So elderberries, they have many protective properties, and the Middle Ages people, they were very superstitious, so they wore small amulets made of the elderberry tree, and they wore it around around their neck, you know, the Black Death and all those horrible things that people could get in those days. So elderberry was highly regarded, and you also had to make little offerings to the elderberry mother, and if you slept under an elderberry tree, you could see the future. And Hulda, she was the keeper of the underworld, and the dead spirits, they slept under elderberries in the underworld, and Hulda was guarding them until the resurrection. So she kept them nice and calm and sleeping there in the underworld until it was time to come up again. So I think Conrad mentioned that, you know, elder keeps insects away, so if you're bothered by mosquitoes, put elderberry leaves in your hat. Yes, and it keeps the flies away. Elderberry leaves tea also kills aphids, so maybe it's a more natural way than all the others. And also bean poles, you know, the climbing beans, if you use elderberry you know, branches, or, you know, you make a teepee, it keeps the bugs away, and it also makes the beans to grow much healthier.
You mean using the stalk or a branch from it?
Yes, yeah.
Not one that's living?
I don't really know. I would think a living would be more powerful.
Yes.
Because a dead tree limb is a dead tree limb. I think it has lost its power. That's my personal feeling. So anyway, I'm sorry to keep you so long.
At Richters, it's not just a garden, it's a whole new world. For herb plants, seeds, veggies, and more, visit us at richters.com or call 1-800-668-4372.